For a couple of years there, I was just working in Calgary, going to work every day as an engineer. But in the back of my mind, I always had kind of the lessons I learned and the guys that had taught me. And so I realized if I was just going to sit at work every day, I mean, it would be crazy not to start saving money, because if you're not saving money, you're not really getting ahead, and you're just going to keep doing whatever it is you're doing for the rest of your life. So then I realized it was really important to save money. And so I started really, really making that my focus for a couple of years until I had enough money to take time off work and then set out on my first big adventure.
Dan Grec thought of himself as an ordinary guy. As a middle-class kid growing up in Victoria, Australia, he thought that to have a fun life, you needed money, and to have money, you needed a good, steady job. Then, as he entered his 20s, he started noticing people who were having larger-than-life adventures on very little money. Ordinary people like him. Following their example, he started planning his own big adventure. In 2009, when he was in his late 20s, Dan quit his engineering job in Calgary, Canada, to drive his Jeep Wrangler all the way from Alaska to Argentina on a budget of just $10,000. He wrote 2 books related to that journey: The Road Chose Me, a travel memoir of that trip, and Work Less to Live Your Dreams, which shares what he learned about changing his relationship to money and work to make adventures like these a reality. Now Dan is in his second major overland adventure, this time driving a Jeep all the way around Africa, a journey of 80,000 miles that he estimated would take him about 2 years. In today's interview, I catch up with Dan as he nears the end of his trip around Africa. You're going to love this conversation if you wonder how a person makes the leap to van life or the overlander lifestyle. If you wonder how you could finance a trip like this. If you're curious to hear what it's actually like to be out on the road for such a long period of time in super remote places. We talk about all of this and much more. Enjoy the show. I'm Lisa Hawashi, and this is Leap Like Me, the show about the leaps people take to make the most of this amazing life. Hey, Dan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Lisa. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I wondered if you could start by just setting the scene for us. Where are you and what's going on in your life today?
Absolutely. I am in Tanzania in East Africa, and I'm sitting just near my Jeep that I turned into a house on wheels, and then I'm driving around Africa. I've been driving now for a little bit over 2 years, and I hope to cover almost the entire continent.
And so how far into your journey are you right now?
Yeah, I'm actually approaching the end point. So I've been through 29 countries now, and I have about 5 or 6 to go until I reach Egypt, which is the end point of my trip.
So my husband was the one who found you and recommended you to my show. And he had found you and started reading your book, The Road Chose Me, which tells the story of your 2-year drive prior to this from Alaska to Argentina. And he really loves the idea of overlanding. And so I've just gotten introduced to the idea of overlanding through him. Would you explain like this sort of culture and sort of movement to people who may not know about it?
For sure, yeah. Overlanding is a little bit like van life, where you can build a vehicle as elaborately or as simply as you like. Usually it's some sort of 4-wheel drive vehicle, probably has a fridge, probably has some sort of nice sleeping setup like a tent on the roof or interior. And then the idea is that you take that vehicle and you live out of it and go exploring. And so that could be exploring your home state, your home country, or it could be exploring the entire world. There's really no limit on where you can actually go.
And so I have kind of a novice question. If there is a freeway or like a nice paved highway available, do overlanders definitely take the more rugged roads, or is that part of the overlanding idea?
I think it all comes down to personal preference. I think maybe traditionally 20 or 30 years ago, kind of the idea was like, let's go as far off the beaten path as exists on the planet. But I think these days everyone has different goals, and maybe you want to travel parts of Europe and visit all of the cities and sample all of the delicious food. So at that point, it makes perfect sense to drive on all the paved roads. So I think everyone has their own kind of preferences in those regards, and it's all free game. It's really whatever you want to do.
And so what have been kind of your setup and your preferences on this trip through Africa?
Because I was setting out to drive Western Africa, which is quite notorious for having probably the worst roads on the planet, I really worked hard and I designed and built a really rugged four-wheel drive. So I upgraded the suspension. I have a winch. I have lots of off-roading accessories to really make the vehicle strong enough to be able to go where I wanted to go. And then on top of that, I really wanted not just to tolerate the trip, but actually enjoy it. After all, it is my life. And so I installed a fridge, and I've got a drinking water setup. I've got a really nice, comfortable pop-up roof where I sleep. The Jeep has solar panels. It has all of my camera gear. So I really do. I consider it my little house on wheels. It's my first attempt at a tiny house.
And what are some of the must-haves that you need in your vehicle that you've discovered along the way?
Yeah, for me, I really love to cook and eat really good quality food. So for me, having a fridge is, I just can't imagine doing the trip without a fridge. And then, of course, that brings nice cold drinking water as well, which is always nice to have in Africa. And then as well as that, the really nice sleeping is good to have. So I'm up off the ground and it's warm and it's dry. You know, there's no bugs, there's no mud. So with those two things combined, I get to eat well and I get to sleep well. And then so my days are enjoyment once I've done that.
And you get to visit these amazing places in that with those comforts as well.
That's right. Yeah, I can literally drive anywhere that I want. You know, I look at a map and I see a waterfall or a lake or a mountain, and I just say, all right, I'm going to try and get there, whatever that looks like.
And yeah, how have you planned your trip? Do you plan it in great detail, or do you kind of let people's recommendations along the way and your own intuitions lead you as you go?
Yeah, I definitely take that second approach where I rely on locals and just sort of making it up as I go along. I found if you try to plan too much, your plans fall apart. You know, the roads maybe are worse than you expected, or you get delayed applying for a visa, or you just get to somewhere really beautiful and you think, hey, I want to stay here for a week. This is great. And then so when your plan falls apart, that can bring on a lot of stress and a lot of kind of angst about like, why did I spend all of that time planning now if I'm just going to throw it out the window? So for me, I much prefer not to overplan and overthink. I research each country a little bit and I come up with a vague idea of the things that I would like to see or the regions that I would like to visit. And then I just sort of let it unfold as it does once I'm there.
And in this trip so far, where have been a couple of those places that you've just either wanted to stay a really long time or you're so glad you stumbled upon?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's been quite a few really unexpected gems that, you know, because West Africa isn't traveled very often, I don't think it gets talked about much. And so Gabon as a country is one of those magical places that it has enormous national parks that are all wilderness. And so there's forest elephants and there's gorillas. And there's beautiful big green rolling hills. I kind of always thought that part of the world would just be jungle, but it isn't. It has beautiful white sand beaches and the locals there are really, really friendly. Everyone speaks French and I learned French along the way. And so it was really great to be able to just sit and chit chat to people and they were really welcoming and really happy to have me in their country. So for me, Gabon has been a total standout in Africa.
Very cool. And I have a 1.5-year-old daughter. We're just starting to get really into the world of animals. What is your favorite African animal so far?
For me, elephants have just been the most magical and special creatures on the planet. Every single time I see one, I turn the engine off and my jaw hits the floor and I just sit and stare wide-eyed. I must have 10,000 photos of elephants by now. And still to this day, I still think they're just so amazing. They're so enormous and they move so gracefully. And the longer you watch them, you realize they have such big personalities. They're playful and they can be happy and they can be grumpy. And elephants are a magical creature.
I would love to see them in the wild. That would be incredible.
Mm-hmm. It really is, yeah. And to have spent so much time with them, you know, I've been camping where they walk within 100 yards of me and things like that is really special.
So growing up, did you ever imagine that you'd be living this type of lifestyle?
No, not at all. Not even in my wildest dreams. My mum and dad are both teachers back in Australia, and so we grew up very middle class. And going to university was just sort of what was expected of us, my brothers and sisters and I. So we did. And I just always imagined that like life was go to work 9 to 5, earn a salary, buy a house, have some kids, and that would sort of lead to happiness. And that's what I always thought that's what I would do with my life.
And so what moved you on to kind of a different track for yourself?
Yeah, I reflect on this very often, actually. And for me, when I was finished with university, I was really burnt out. I'd had enough. And I signed up to go and do a season at Lake Tahoe in California at a ski resort. I'd never really been skiing, but, Australians, we want to go to ski resorts. And so I lived on the mountain there with a bunch of local guys from California and around. And there was something about them. They were the happiest people I'd ever met in my entire life. But the part that shocked me is that none of them had any money because they were just working at ski resorts. But somehow they were really happy and they were having all of these larger than life adventures with no money. And so I spent years wondering about that. And I thought, how can you do that? I thought to be happy, you had to go to work and you had to have money. And so for me, that was a real turning point, a real sort of eye-opening moment of like, okay, I can pursue these big grandiose dreams and I don't have to have, a big fat bank account.
And so after that point of meeting these guys and kind of seeing this different example of how you might live your life, how did things unfold after that?
Well, it was a little bit depressing at the time. I ran out of money, as happens. And so then I had to go and get an engineering job to save money and to be able to pay rent. And so for a couple of years there, I was just working in Calgary, going to work every day as an engineer. But in the back of my mind, I always had kind of the lessons I learned and the guys that had taught me. And so I realized if I was just going to sit at work every day, it would be crazy not to start saving money. Because if you're not saving money, you're not really getting ahead and you're just going to keep doing whatever it is you're doing for the rest of your life. So then I realized it was really important to save money. And so I started really, really making that my focus for a couple of years until I had enough money to take time off work and then set out on my first big adventure.
And, a lot of people really are curious about this question of, how to go about saving money for a big adventure. So what tips would you offer?
This is by far the number one question that I get asked.
Great. Me too.
For me, it's all about having a dream and focusing on it and realizing like that is the goal, that is the carrot on the stick, that's enticing me. And so I print out posters, I put maps on the wall, I put postcards on my fridge so that every day I'm reminded of like, that's right, I'm doing this so I can get myself to Alaska or I'm doing this so I can see an elephant in the wild. And then I go to work that day and someone says, oh, hey, we're all going out for lunch. Do you want to come? I have fresh in my mind that elephant and I think, well, maybe I could save that $15 instead. So maybe I'll just eat the sandwiches I brought to work and that $15 just goes straight in my savings account and that will get me closer to that elephant.
So it sounds like visual reminders are really important to you.
Yeah, and I realize like that's just me. I'm sure everyone else would have their own sort of trigger or their own way of helping to remind themselves that they are working towards a really amazing goal.
Well, I know that you published a book about this topic, and so I know that you've done a lot of thinking about it. What are some other things that you've discovered is important about getting clear on your dreams, and what kind of practical steps are super important in order to be able to go after them?
I think it's really important to surround yourself with people who maybe have lived a similar dream or who are willing to accept that a similar dream is possible, who aren't just going to tell you like, no, that's a really dumb idea, don't do that. Because then every day you're getting reinforcement that it can come true and it will happen. And maybe you can't do that in your hometown, but maybe then you could spend time on the internet interacting with people who are doing these things, or you could listen to podcasts of people doing these things, just to really reinforce that like this dream is possible and it's okay for me to dream this big. You don't want to be constantly told like, don't do that. That's silly. It's not possible.
Yeah, I read that you at one point realized that after seeing some pretty incredible examples of some big adventurers, that you realized that you were an average guy dreaming of doing something really big. So how did you go about, like, what practical steps did you take to then go after your really big dreams?
Saving money was sort of the job of the day. And so I just cut out all of the things that weren't essential. So I had no cell phone. I walked to work every day. I never bought lunch at work, didn't have a TV. So therefore I didn't have Netflix or Hulu or any of that. And sort of all of that money was just, I set up an automatic transfer to automatically go into my savings account. And then so my savings account was growing, and it was going to take a while, but that's okay. And then in the meantime, I set about kind of researching and trying to understand what was possible. So I would spend hours on the internet just Googling for other people who'd maybe done something similar. I started borrowing a ton of books from the library, people who'd done similar adventures. And then I started trying to practice and get familiar with my setup. So I had a little Jeep at the time. And on the weekends, I would just go out camping in the Canadian Rockies, just sort of me and my tent and my little cook stove. And I'd start practicing and figuring out like, oh, what else do I need that I don't have? Or is this going to work? Or is the Jeep strong enough? Or can I drive it on these rough roads? So it was about practicing. It was about researching and just sort of getting confident and comfortable that it could all work together.
And so when you took your sort of initial leap to have your first adventure, what was your setup and your plan at that point?
So I had a little Jeep Wrangler and I'd saved up about $10,000 at the time. And I had just a normal ground tent and a little cook stove and a bag of clothes. And that's everything that I had. And I threw it all in the Jeep. And originally, when I first dreamed of it, I was planning to just go to Alaska for the summer. Alaska had always been a destination in my mind that is, larger than life. And I read Jack London growing up as a kid. And so when I was on this sort of voyage to Alaska, a friend of mine said, well, Mexico is really great as well. Why don't you go down to Mexico after Alaska and, go surfing? And I'd been really missing surfing at the time. And it kind of just grew from there in terms of like, well, from Mexico, you can just drive all of Central America. And then so it all ballooned into why don't I drive to Argentina?
And so it sounds like it kind of just gradually grew, the adventure did.
Yeah, I guess before I left home, I was planning on driving to Argentina, but I felt like I didn't want to have that hanging over me as like, you must, or else you're a failure. Because, maybe I would have gotten to Costa Rica and either been not enjoying myself or not felt safe or for a million reasons thought, I want to do something else with my life now. So I didn't sort of want to set myself up with this really enormous task. I thought, why don't I just go and enjoy myself and then see what that looks like day by day?
And as you were initially setting out, what kind of emotions were you feeling?
Yeah, I was definitely apprehensive about what had I done. I'd quit my job and I'd moved out of my apartment and I'd sold all of my stuff. And I remember clearly when I was in Alaska, I withdrew money from the bank and I got a receipt. And my bank account was not a very big number. And I thought, I can't get to Argentina with that small amount of money. So, yeah, there was some apprehension there, but also just, I was so excited. I had at one stage what I call an excitement attack. I was shaking and like sweating. And I was like, I just couldn't believe it was real. I was like, this is unbelievable. Yeah, so I was immensely excited and really happy.
And so what did you start learning about money once you got on the road? Once you get out on the road, you start to see that bank account start to dwindle. What did you learn from that experience?
I definitely, over the years, I've really changed my perspective on money and about how the money versus happiness versus time balance. And that if you want to, you can spend all of your time earning more money, but then you don't really have enough time to have happiness because you're too busy earning money. And so that balance is really interesting to me. And the longer I spent on the road, the more I realized some of the happiest moments of my life were when I wasn't spending any money at all. I was just walking up a mountain or sitting by a stream reading a book or just hanging out with friends in a park. So I really started playing the game of like, why don't I try to have a lot of enjoyment but not spend a lot of money? It's easy to go to Disneyland and spend $200 and have a good day. But what about trying to have a good day without spending $200? Like, why don't I play that game and see what that looks like?
So that's really changed for you over time.
It really has, yeah. And kind of this realization that I definitely need an amount of money to do what I'm doing, but certainly much less than I ever would have thought. And that, in fact, now that I have less money, I think I'm happier than when I had more money because I have so much more time to do the things that I want to do and explore my passions and work on my photography and all of those kinds of things.
So in between your really big trips, the one through the Americas and then this one in Africa, have you gone back to a full-time job to save more money, or how have you managed your finances from that initial starting point?
Right, yeah. After Argentina, I flew back to Canada and I did sign up for a full-time job again. And so that was the goal there, was to just keep saving money and then sort of plan for whatever the next move was. And it was really enjoyable to go back to work. It was great to, be stable again and have an apartment and go to the gym and have friends. So I didn't look at it as a bad phase of my life. I really enjoyed it.
And I know that, you've done some self-publishing, you've had some sponsorships on this trip, and you also have a fairly big following on social media. Have you thought about turning sort of this traveling into a business, or has it helped support you? How does that sort of figure into your setup?
Yeah, on my first trip from Alaska to Argentina, I didn't pursue any of that. I was blogging, but I wasn't earning any money. I wasn't trying really. And then so for this time in Africa, I decided just to see if it would work or not. So I've been writing for quite a few magazines, which has been a really good way to earn money on the road. And I'm also earning some money from book sales and from my website. So yeah, it's a really great way to support myself while I'm on the road. It certainly isn't paying for the trip. Like, my savings account is still going down month by month. And so I toy with the idea of making this my business for the rest of my life. But then I kind of wonder, would that take away some of the enjoyment of what I'm doing if I turned it into a job? Maybe I kind of enjoy doing this for a couple of years, then go back to a desk job for a couple of years. So I'm not really sure. I guess I'm just exploring what each option looks like, and maybe I'll dabble in each one for a while and see what happens.
Yeah. So when I took my own sabbatical, I'm also a writer. And I decided that I just wanted to not do anything that had anything to do with money on my sabbatical. But then, there's also this desire to share what's going on and to engage. And so I'm just curious for you, what has inspired you to, you create blogs and videos and share photography. What's behind that for you?
Yeah, for me, I guess we're quite similar in that way. I feel like it really gives me a sense of purpose. I think if I was just traveling for these years with no other sort of greater purpose in mind, I would get quite bored, or I would feel a bit listless. That's, I guess, my personality. But also in Africa, I've become really, really inspired. From the day that I got here, it was really obvious to me that the image that most of us have in our mind of, quotes, Africa is so, so far from the reality of life on the ground. And I really feel like I have a responsibility or an obligation to try and show people and tell people that, people here are extraordinarily friendly and happy and kind and generous. And that, the bad news stories that you hear in the media, they're just the tiniest fraction of the reality of life over here. So for me, I feel like it's kind of a bit of a personal mission that I'm on right now, to try and show people and tell people this place is amazing and you should get over here.
So in this case, you've really found a story that you wanted to tell.
That's right. Yeah. And I didn't know before I got here. I really just stumbled onto it.
After setting off on that first adventure, what are some of the most important things that you learned about yourself?
Oh, that I learned about myself. I guess I learned that I am the kind of person who really wants to overthink my life and what am I doing and kind of where is this leading. So I guess some people might call it a life hack, is kind of the cliche word for it these days, about how can I extract a maximum enjoyment out of life without going to work too much. So I think the thing I learned about myself is that I forever want to play with that balance and try to make it work to my advantage, to have enjoyment, but not necessarily just sell myself to a job. I guess I learned too that I'm really comfortable with my own company, and that it's okay to spend hours or days by yourself, reading a book or thinking or whatever that is. And I learned too that I just love meeting new cultures and languages and trying new food. And it's something that I really revel in, just sort of wander out onto the streets of whatever country I'm in and throw myself in the deep end and see what happens.
And you had mentioned that getting you out the door, what was really important for you was to have some inspiration, some role models. Who have been a couple of the most important people for you in this way?
Yeah, and this is a really good one because I think when you first start searching on the internet, you find people that seemingly have unlimited money or National Geographic sponsorship. So quickly you sort of close down and say, well, I can't do that. Um, so there's this guy, his name is Ted Simon, and in about 1967, he rode a motorbike around the entire world by himself. And his book and his story is really cool because he was completely ordinary. He had no sponsorship. He hardly had any money. In fact, he didn't even have a motorbike license when he started. And so I was really inspired. And then I started hunting out more and more people. And I mean, if you start looking on the internet, you're going to find hundreds of people like me. Friends, Lewis and Lacey, their website is Lost World Expedition. Other friends, their website is Home on the Highway. I could go on all day about them. These are just regular people who decided, oh, I'm just going to go and explore the world and have adventures and kind of see what happens.
So to wrap up our conversation, I've got 3 questions for you. The first is, what do you wish you had known before you took your leap?
I wish I had known that it isn't nearly as difficult as you think it's going to be. So the fear of fear is much worse than actually doing it.
And what was the most unexpected thing that came from your leap?
The most unexpected thing, without a doubt, was just how friendly everyone is in the entire world. It doesn't matter where you show up, some tiny little dirt street town in Mali or Guatemala, people are really friendly and welcoming.
And so for someone who's thinking of doing something similar, what one piece of advice would you offer them?
My piece of advice would be to just get out there and try it. And remember that if you try it, it doesn't have to be for the rest of your life. It only has to be for as long as you want it to be. So dip your toes in, maybe start with a weekend or a week or a month and see what you think and see how you feel and then adjust things as you want to.
Yeah, I really like your explanation of how you start taking your weekend trips with your Jeep. That seems like an awesome way to get started.
Yeah, and because I understand not everyone wants to live in a car full time. I would never suggest that everybody do that. But maybe you can find a balance. I know lots of people who maybe they drive for a week and then they get an Airbnb for a month. And when you're in somewhere like Argentina, Airbnbs are dirt cheap. And then you stay in one place and you can take salsa dancing lessons and you can eat great food. And then at the end of that month, let's go to a new city and then do it again. So I think it's really important for everyone to sort of find their own version of what this looks like.
And so if people want to keep up with you on your journey, what's the best way that they can do that?
Right. The best way is across social media. My handle is The Road Chose Me. And so that's on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And then my website as well. I blog twice a week, and that's theroadchoseme.com.
Well, thank you, Dan, so much. And I wish you the best. I'm looking forward to continuing to see your photos on Instagram.
Thanks, Lisa. It's been a pleasure talking to you today.
Thanks for listening to today's show. Head on over to lisahawashi.com for the show notes for today's episode. You'll see some great photos that Dan has supplied of his adventure, as well as the links and resources he's also given us. If you're working on your own leap in life and you'd like some support, come on over to the Leap Like Me community on Facebook or reach out to me personally at my website, lisahawashi.com. or by sending me a message on Facebook or Instagram. If you're enjoying the show, I would love it if you left us a rating or review on iTunes. And if you've already done so, thank you so much. I value each and every one of those. Also, be sure to subscribe to the show so you don't miss any of the upcoming episodes. Have a great week. Thanks for listening to Leap Like Me.